make decisions that honor you and benefit all those involved. Help us to listen with open hearts and minds, to speak with kindness and respect, and to work together in unity and purpose. May your peace fill our discussions, and may we leave this meeting with a sense of accomplishment and a plan that reflects your will. In your holy name we pray, amen. Amen. Stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Carolyn, are they filming for Facebook? Are they filming for Facebook tonight?
I believe they're filming, yes.
Okay, alrighty. This determination of a quorum. When I call your name, just say aye. Jamaica White?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Al Ford?
Aye.
Negative on Mark Jacobs. Ernestine?
Aye.
Phyllis Hatcher?
Aye.
And Angela?
Aye.
Okay, we made establishment of a quorum. I'm looking for a motion to approve our agenda as it was presented to us. Do I hear a motion for the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the agenda as written.
I have a motion to accept the agenda. Do I hear a second?
A second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The agenda has been approved. We were all provided a copy of the minutes from the January 9th meeting by email. I trust that everybody had the opportunity to read those and go over them. I look for a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting of January 9th, 2025. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the minutes of January 9th, 2025 as written.
I've got a motion to approve the minutes. Do I hear a second?
Aye, Phyllis Hatcher, second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Already. And now, Carolyn, if you will start the rules and procedures on the magic box.
Each speaker must sign their name to the appropriate zoning case sheet and fill out a public comment card to register their intent to speak prior to the start of this meeting. Each item of business shall be handled in the order that it appears on the agenda, unless upon motion of the board, the order is changed. A member of the county planning staff will present each item to the board and will provide recommendations made by both the planning staff and the Conyers-Rockdale Planning Commission for each item of business. The zoning applicant or the agent will have 10 minutes in which to make his or her presentation. Any portion of their 10 minutes may be reserved for rebuttal following the opposition to the application. After the applicant's presentation, all registered speakers who wish to speak in favor of the application will then be heard. They will also be limited to a total of 10 minutes. Once the applicant has made his or her presentation and the speakers in favor of the application have been heard, the secretary will then call upon the registered speakers in opposition to the application. The opposition shall likewise be limited to a total of 10 minutes. Once the public hearing portion is closed, no other speakers will be heard. As a reminder, speakers are to address the board and not the applicant or the audience and are expected to conduct themselves in an appropriate manner. The use of abusive or profane language shall not be allowed. No debate or argument between speakers shall be permitted. After all public comments have been heard, the board may elect to hold general discussion. However, no decisions will be rendered at this hearing. Decisions will be made at the next regularly scheduled Board of Commissioners meeting. Appeals shall be filed with the Clerk of Rockdale County Superior Court within 30 days after the final decision by the Board of Commissioners.
Okay, thank you for that. Our agenda shows no old business for the city of Conyers and no old business for Rockdale County. For new business, Rockdale County is showing none. And now, Mr. Gaither, we're ready for you for the city's new business.
Hey, thank you so much. So the first and only item on the agenda is a rezoning request. This is to request to amend the official zoning map from downtown district, downtown center sub-area to industrial distribution zoning district. That was the original request. In order to do so, though, it does take a comprehensive land use map amendment from special mixed-use activity center to industrial distribution. The property owner is the Douglas J. Ellington Senior Trust. The agent for the property owner is Mr. Daniel Digby. Both the owner and the agent are here tonight. This property is located at 1007 Irwin Bridge Road, tax parcel C08001006E. It is a total of 2.73 acres. And according to Rockdale County Q Public, the 28,560 square foot building was constructed in 1986. So the area around it, the area zoning around it to the north, we have downtown center. It has vacant properties and a gas station. If you can see the cursor, we have a vacant property here and a gas station. To the south, you have a small retail business right here, and then the city gas pumps here. To the east, we have downtown Edge, single-family residential abutting the property, and downtown Civic, which a church and civic use abutting the property to the east. And to the west, we have downtown center with warehouse and non-conforming wholesale businesses, downtown center zoning district there. Irwin Bridge Road is classified as a local street, and water and sewer is obviously available to the building and to the location. There is the zoning of the property there with the star indicates the property in question. The pinkish color is downtown center. The taupe color, I guess as you can call that, is the downtown Edge. And then the bright pink, that is your downtown Civic. And then the dark purple across Irwin Bridge Road, and behind the properties across Irwin Bridge Road is purple, which is industrial. So if this were to be rezoned, this would take this property from the color it is now to purple. So keep that in mind. The future land use map, as you see there, the chicken pox, if you'll call it, or small pox with the spotty areas, the special mixed use activity center. The special mixed use activity center and all the properties in the downtown district are identified as the special mixed use activity center land use designation. If this property were to change to industrial, you would involve or introduce this industrial distribution land use category at this location. So give you a little bit of history of the property. Conyers adopted zoning in 1964, and the subject property was assigned a commercial zoning district C2. On March 20th, 1983, Bobby Mason petitioned the City Council to rezone the property to C2 conditional. And he quoted in the application, "We would like to expand the C2 zoning to include the following uses. A, storage and warehouse facility. B, assembly of parts for production of finished products. C, manufacturing, fabricating, processing, or assembly." July 5th, 1983, the City Council approved the request with the following conditions as recommended by the Planning Commission at the time. 1, no truck traffic from Barton Street. Barton Street is a little bitty narrow street that abuts the property to the rear. 2, proper buffer should be used. 3, noise level control from the residential property, and if manufacturing imposed in the residential neighborhood, the noise level control will govern. And the C2 conditions shall include number 1, storage and warehouse. 2, assembly of parts for production of finished product. And 3, manufacturing, fabrication, processing, or assembly. On September 17th of 2024, the City Council adopted the downtown district and all 3 of its sub-areas, thereby repealing other zoning designations within the boundaries of this district.
Did you mean 2014?
Yes, sir. What did I say?
2024.
Well, thank you. 2014. The property is currently vacant and has been since September 27th, 2023, when the owner of the business previously occupying the building, 4D Printing, notified the planning office that they had closed the business and no longer operating in Georgia. The use at the time, 4D Printing, was a printing and publication. It was a legal, non-conforming use, as it was not one of the 95 identified uses that could be established in the downtown center sub-area. However, it was established prior to the adoption of the downtown district and therefore allowed to remain. Now, if you recall, there's been times we've talked about nonconformity before. I'll remind you of that. Section 8-7-96 F1 of the Conyers Code of Ordinance states, and I quote, "When a nonconforming use is discontinued for a period of 180 days or discontinued for any period of time without the definite intention to reinstate the nonconforming use, the property involved may therefore be used only for a conforming purpose." Now, the purpose of the industrial distribution district is to provide for a suitable location along arterial highways for wholesale warehousing, trade shops, and light manufacturing uses, usually located on or near existing community facilities and transportation corridors. The intent of this district is to establish areas of industrial use that would not be objectionable by reason of dust, odor, noise, traffic safety, or congestion. Such uses should be encouraged to locate away from residential districts in accordance with the policies outlined in the city's comprehensive plan and under the following conditions. Condition 1, such proposed use will not substantially affect or alter nearby property values. And condition 2, the site plan for such use provides for adequate ingress and egress of vehicular traffic and will not cause health, safety, or unreasonable traffic safety or congestion problems in the area. Now, I want to back up and remind you that when we're looking at zoning and changing the zoning, we're talking about all the uses that can go in that zoning district and would they be appropriate. Remember, there are those 8 criteria in which we are bound by to review requests for zoning changes and apply those 8 criteria and how they apply to the property in question. Now, the subject property is not located along arterial highway, nor located on or near existing community facilities and transportation corridors. Additionally, the proximity to single-family detached and civic uses does not make this property appropriate for the industrial distribution district. There are those standards of zoning I was talking about. There are 68 identified uses that could be established in the industrial distribution district, and many of which would be detrimental to the use and usability of surrounding and nearby properties and roadways due to potential noise, odor, vibration, and/or commercial vehicle traffic. Furthermore, the introduction of the industrial distribution district at this location would be spot zoning and would work to undermine the city's comprehensive plan. Remember, spot zoning is arbitrary, capricious, and makes unjustified exceptions for a property or properties within an established district. Therefore, staff recommends denying the request to amend the comprehensive plan from special mixed-use activity center to industrial distribution, and the request to amend the zoning map from downtown center sub-area of the downtown district to industrial distribution district for this 2.73 acres at 1007 Irwin Bridge Road, tax parcel C080010006E. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, the applicant does have a presentation.
That was one question, Scott. I thought you said it was 95 other opportunities. When I was reading the review, I thought it was 95 different opportunities.
Yes, ma'am. There's 95 permitted uses in the downtown center zoning district that they could potentially use now because it's zoned for it.
Okay.
There's 68 uses allowed in the industrial distribution.
Okay.
Any other questions of Mr. Gaither?
No.
Okay, we'll hear from the applicant.
I think that's you, Mr. Digby, right? Yes. I'll let you drive on that one.
Thanks. Good evening. I'm Daniel Digby. For those of you that don't know me, I've practiced law in Conyers for the better part of the last 30 years. The owner is Mr. Doug Ellington. He is the trustee of a living trust, of which he is the grantor and the beneficiary. He put the property into his living trust several years back. So the history of this property is significant with regard to the Ellington family and their properties in the area. The extension of Irwin Bridge Road down to Railroad Street was a grant by Mr. Ellington's father to the city of Conyers for that street when Mr. Ellington's father bought the Owen property, which originally encompassed what is Irwin Bridge Road, or the part of Irwin Bridge Road south of Main Street, down to the railroad, essentially. And if you, I think you should each have a paper copy of the flyer about the property. The building was built in either 84 or 86. It is an industrial warehouse distribution building, 28,000 square feet on almost 2.73 acres, well situated. If you look at the aerial, and I did print front and back on the papers that you have, y'all, you can see that the property is well situated. The building's well situated on the property. It's not crowded. It's not dilapidated. It's in excellent condition. It is 40 years old, and most recently was leased by 4D Printing Company, a commercial industrial printer, from 1994 through December 31st of 2024, and that is significant. City staff indicated that the tenant vacated in September. That is not true. The tenant did not vacate until March, April of this past year, 2024. The tenant paid rent as it was legally obligated to pay rent for this property through the end of 2024, which by my count was, today is the 13th, so that was 44 days ago. So the 180 days has not run, in our opinion. This property was used for industrial printing purposes for 30 years. And the rezoning of the property by the city in 2014 brought it from what was then known as C2, and Mr. Gaither has given you the information about the original conditions of zoning from 1986, I believe, with Mr. Mason. You also have an affidavit from Mr. Mason, who could not be here this evening. Mr. Mason is the agent who's listed the property and has for many years. He has over 50 years of experience in leasing property in Rockdale and Conyers. So the reason we have to be here is because Mr. Ellington wants to continue to use his property, and the city has essentially said, no, you cannot. We have rezoned it 10 years ago to downtown district zoning, which allows for various types of retail, small shops, restaurants, and the like. It cannot be used for, if 4D Printing came back and wanted to reopen, the city says they can't do that, despite the fact that this property was originally developed for that use and used for 30 years for that use, ending by the termination of the lease at the end of December of 2024. Bear with me. Trying to make that big enough to see it. So you can see the screen, and there's the subject. If you'll follow my cursor to the east of the subject is the county school board's warehouse, which long ago was the county football high school stadium. If any of you were around back then, I wasn't. Maybe Mr. Harris was, but it's been a while. So that is a warehouse is a warehouse used by the county school system. To the west, across Irwin Bridge Road, let me speak. To the south here is the city of Conyers fuel tanks. And it's not zoned for industrial, but it's certainly an industrial use. To the west, we have very similar buildings facing on Irwin Bridge Road, which are in fact owned by a member of the Ellington family. The ones fronting on Irwin Bridge were rezoned in 2014 to this downtown center district. The ones fronting on Ellington Drive, which is this street here, facing this way, are zoned industrial. These two buildings here, one is zoned downtown district. The one to the west, immediately 10, 15 feet away, is zoned industrial. Across Ellington Drive, these are zoned industrial. Ellington Drive was named so because that street was dedicated or given to the city by the Ellington family. And all this property was originally owned by the Ellington family and was developed again in 1980, in the 1980s for the development of this building. So compatibility is certainly an issue, and I would submit to you that the compatibility is here we have industrial, here we have industrial, here we have industrial, and the spot zoning occurred in 2014 when the city decided to rezone this corridor as a different zoning than the actual use. And then when the lease is up at the end of 2024, the city says to Mr. Ellington, you can no longer have industrial distribution uses in your 28,000 square foot building, and you must reconfigure it to the uses that we will now allow. And that is in its form a spot zoning by the city. We submit that it's appropriate under all the standards and criteria for the property to be rezoned to ID and would agree to appropriate conditions. Again, the building is well sited on the property. There is no and has been no problems with the property or with the use of the property. There's good access for traffic. Irwin Bridge Road is well situated, and it goes without saying that to the south is the CSX Railroad, which you know is a very busy railroad corridor, and further to the west is industrial uses, numerous and sundry. Half a mile to the west is Biolab, certainly an industrial use. Not to discount, this is obviously North Main Street, where I lived for 19 years over here. But the bottom line is this building's been there for 40 years. The property to the south is industrial. The school board's property is an industrial distribution warehouse. And the properties to the west, whether they are actually zoned industrial or rezoned to the downtown district center uses, are still in non-conforming uses. And we're asking for your recommendation to make sense of this, because otherwise Mr. Ellington cannot use his property. Mr. Mason's affidavit speaks to the extreme cost of reconfiguring this building into something that could be leased for uses under the downtown district zoning that the city has applied to the property. With that, I would welcome any questions that you have.
Is the 4D company want to lease it?
No, ma'am. They moved out,
So that's
and
not a pending lease, that's not an option for.
right, their lease was up in December 31st of 2024.
I can speak to the 4D company because they were my printer for the About Conyers magazine. And they left
Yeah, they were my
at
printer
the
too.
beginning of last year, I believe it was. Because I helped move them out, in fact.
As far as the applicant would tell you that they moved out in April of 24, got all of their equipment out of there. And it's significant that Mr. Ellington immediately hired a contractor to do the repairs and update to the building to relet it for similar use. And that began immediately in the spring of 2024. although it's significant, the property was still under lease and could not be leased to another party until after December of 2024 because 4D Printing paid the rent as they were legally obligated under the lease through the end of 2024.
So in the lease contract, you're stating that he couldn't receive rental expense and lease and occupy it again with someone else? Did the lease
No,
actually
he
say
received, Mr. Ellington received the rents that were due, the monthly rent, in 2024 through the end of the year, and was paid those rents. There are other amounts that are due from 4D Printing under the terms of the lease, which have not yet been paid. But in terms of their leasehold, which they had for 30 years, an original lease with multiple extensions and amendments, that leasehold ended December 31st of 2024.
that? My question is, the terms and condition of the lease agreement, I'm asking, would it allow for someone else to come in if he would have actually put it up? And he could receive money for the lease?
He could not lease it to another tenant
Oh, that's what I'm asking.
while it was still, while they had already paid for the rent for 2024.
Okay, he could.
He would have to refund rents to 4D Printing.
Okay.
So I have a question. So based on the fact that the city, on September 17, 2014, they adopted the downtown district in its 3 sub-areas, that whole clause, right? At the point 4D Printing vacated that building with that new ordinance in place, could they ever have rented it to anyone else?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Ms. Ingram.
Well, it seems like if I understood what Scott was saying, as long as 4D Printing was in that warehouse, it was a legal, non-conforming use.
Correct.
Okay. So at whatever point 4D Printing were to vacate the premises, for whatever reason, could that warehouse, based on the new ordinance, and based on I think there were some other stipulations, could it ever have been rented as a legal, non-conforming use to someone who wanted to use it as a warehouse?
Yes, it could.
It could have.
Right. Mr. Gaither will tell you that there's the city ordinance says after 180 days it cannot.
Okay.
But the law is more involved than just that simple statement. Though they may have moved out their equipment in April of 24, they continued to lease it through December of 24. And when they did vacate, Mr. Ellington went in and started making repairs that were necessary because of their 30 years of occupancy so that he could relet it to, say, another printing company or another industrial distribution type use. This is not an intent to start something new or create something different than what's always been there and what is in the vicinity of this property. But yes, if someone just like 4D came in the next day, they could operate as a legal non-conforming use. There is a disagreement about when that time started to run or may have run out.
Out of respect for the city, I think it was good that they, to me, what I'm receiving, that they grandfathered it in.
That's not.
Although they had the
Well,
ordinance
they're
change.
legally obligated to do that
And
under
which
the
was good.
state and federal
And they
constitution.
grandfathered it in as up until the term when they were notified that it was going to be, they were no longer going to do it. They were
Well-
no longer going to be occupying the building. They were notified by 4D that they were no longer going to
Right.
so they grandfathered it in. But now, you know, that was back in April, May. I'm not quite sure what time. I guess he said April. So now they paid their lease agreement, which they should have did because they was obligated to do so. But you wanted a jump in being grandfathered in. And I think what the city's saying, if they would have occupied the building, they would have continued to honor it being
Well,
grandfathered in.
as the owner of the property, Mr. Ellington has no control over when 4D Printing moves out. He does control the lease with them. They paid their rent through the end of the year. He's obligated to have the property available to them. So the city ordinance, and it's not the city's generosity, it's their ordinance, which is an ordinance based on state law and state case law, that you can't just cut someone off if you've rezoned something previously. They get to continue to use their property as a legal non-conforming use. Now, a different scenario, Mr. Oglesby, would be if Mr. Ellington just, they moved out, I'm not going to do anything for 6 months, and now I want to relet it to, another industrial distribution user. That's not the case.
Does Mr. Ellington have occupied someone who's interested in the building?
He's had, by the count we had the other day with Mr. Mason, 12 inquiries.
Does he have someone who's pending to occupy the building?
He's had inquiries, but he's not able to lease the property to
Right.
them at this point because of the city's position. We had inquired of the city said, no, you can't lease it for a similar type use because the 180 days is expired. You have to rezone it, or you have to apply for a text amendment. Mr. Ellington is in a difficult spot because he has spent well over $100,000 preparing the property to be relet as for similar uses.
But this board is not to be received. To me, this board is not for to make it financial beneficial for anybody to.
Oh, I
do
understand
business
that.
Within the state.
Right.
That's not what we're here for. So, as far as his financial obligated to maintain his building, to get his building back up to, lease status, that's relevant as far as I'm concerned.
Well, that would be part of the criteria that the commission would evaluate in terms of, is it appropriate to rezone this to ID? The original zoning was C2. That doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't for some time. The zoning that allows the use that he just had and similar uses for which this building was constructed and was maintained for 40 years is ID. And he doesn't want to put in some disruptive industrial use. He just wants to continue to use the property similarly and use the property in such a way that it's built for. To do something else with the property would be cost prohibitive and would not be in line with what's adjacent and nearby to this property.
But I think in the comprehensive land development, they want to change the vision of other area. And that's what,
Right.
with the Atlanta Regional Commission, that's why it's identified to be something else. They want to change the vision.
Right,
of
and
the
that can be a good idea, but that is limited as to the property rights of an owner. And the benefit or proposed benefit of doing a rezoning like this must be weighed against the impact on the property owner. Mr. Ellington owns the property.
Was Mr. Ellington aware, I guess it was 2014, that it had been rezoned?
He was not.
Reclassified? He wasn't notified at no time by the city that this was?
He was not aware, no.
Okay.
The city did not have to, and I don't believe gave him, he's not aware of receiving any individual notice. The city would have, presumably, if they comply with the law, published a notice that all these parcels, this was not just this parcel, this was parcels on the periphery of Old Town and the downtown area. And it caught up a lot of properties like this that were rezoned to a zoning that doesn't allow their use then or their use now. And so I'm not saying it's a bad thing, maybe it's laudable to push for that, but you cannot take someone's property and say, we've rezoned it to retail, restaurants, and small offices and shops. You can no longer use your 28,000 square foot industrial distribution building for that use. And that's essentially what the city is saying at this point. And we're asking the commission to recommend to the council to rezone it to ID, which is the category that exists now that's most similar to what historically has been this use and the adjoining property. The city's adjoining property to the south is fuel tanks. The adjoining property, if you connect by the little dog leg, is the school board's property, which is a warehouse. The properties across Irwin Bridge Road are essentially industrial and adjoining Ellington Drive to the west. And then, of course, you have a very active rail line just to the south. So this is not a spot zoning where we're dropping an industrial building on top of Old Town Conyers. This is the way it's always been. And and I'm sure y'all are familiar, if you go west from here, it's industrial and heavier commercial along the railroad corridor headed to the west. So I appreciate your thoughtfulness and consideration of this, because this is very important to Mr. Ellington.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's currently zoned DCR. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And when that zoning took place, isn't it advertised like it's?
It would have been advertised.
With signs on the street and informing everyone of what's going on for that area?
Right, but that's not something that Mr. Ellington was aware of, or whether when the city decides to rezone something, yes, they have to publish notice, Mr. Ford. They may well post signs. I don't know if they post, Mr. Gaither can speak to whether they posted signs on individual parcels, but Mr. Ellington will tell you he was not aware of it. And even if he was, would he have been able to stop it or change it? But to me, it's curious that we're intending maybe to change the character 10 years ago of this area, but it has not, and it will not, because it is what it is. It's a 28,000 square foot industrial distribution building that, if you can see from the pictures I've given you, it is what it is. It's open bay. It's I think it's 26 feet at the ceiling, and it's not something that we can cost effectively reconfigure into being let for uses under the zoning that was applied to it in 2014.
Mr. Digby, is the proximity to the single-family detached and civic use concern you at all?
It does not, because it has been there for 40 years, and we have seen no detrimental effects. I do note that to the north of this subject is a property that was permitted and allowed to be developed by the city as a car lot, a used car lot, which frankly I opposed when I lived in Old Town. To the north, the next parcel is a mobile gas station and laundromat and little restaurant, which is somewhat of an intensive commercial use. That was developed since this property was built, both of those parcels. So if you want to, and then of course along to the top of the screen there, you see the residential parcels that front on Main Street, North Main Street. Both of the parcels at the end of Main Street at the intersection of Irwin Bridge Road and North Main are commercial in nature. I don't know the exact zoning of the mobile station at this point. The other corner to the north is a derelict corner, and there's another convenience store north of it, which doesn't have gas pumps anymore. So short answer to your question is no. I don't see any detrimental effect by this proposed zoning. It's not going to change anything on the ground. The uses would be very similar to what was been going on for 40 years.
Since you've made reference to my age, I'll ask you this question. When did Ellington Seed and Feed close? Mr.
I can't answer that one.
What year?
When did
the feed store close?
That was my brother, so I don't.
It was right across the street, correct?
Yeah.
Well, up the street from this
Okay.
property. Yeah. Next to my office, the Whistle Post. That was Ellington Feed and Seed.
Well, the other feed store across the street.
Further down. Sorry? That was home. Sorry, my bad.
That was a different
Right.
feed store. Okay.
Well, Mr. Digby, I had a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
It seems like it's I guess a lease issue more so. I mean, I definitely understand the concerns about the adjacent properties having similar uses as yours, but I would assume that they would fall into the same process if they're legally non-conforming, that if after 180 days they're not using it, it would also revert back to the new zoning. But it seems like in 2014, when they decided to change it to that, something should have been written in the lease that that 4D printing had to operate, until they left. It had to be in operation or the lease expires.
Well, there were multiple renewals or amendments to the lease that carried it through 2024. The lease cannot be written, the lease, it is technically, to answer your question, it is a violation of the lease and a default under the lease for them to vacate prior to the end of the lease. And they were given written notice of that by my office, by me, among other defaults that they made. But one of their defaults was vacating the property before the end of the lease. And so the law cannot punish Mr. Ellington for their breach of the lease. He leased it to them through the end of 2024. The 180 days is not run. We're on day 44 today. And his intention is to lease it as a legal non-conforming use and or to rezone it so that it can be leased without him having to worry about that each time. Because again, the weighing of cost and benefit here is, okay, 10 years ago we decided we're going to rezone all these different parcels all around the city, but we cannot ignore the property owner's rights to use their property as it was built and developed, in this case 40 years ago.
So are you saying because 4D moved out prior to December 2024, that's the reason why this is an issue now? Because it seems like what Scott was saying is that after the use is terminated for 180 days, correct? That's when it's no longer conforming or allowed to be operating in that particular area.
Well,
So that's a lease issue.
we disagree on his definition of use. You can't simply say because 4D called the city and said we're moving out, that's the operative date. They didn't in fact move all their stuff out of there until April of 2024. And then use of the property encompasses leasing it too. I mean, they had the right to do whatever inside that building through the end of December. And Mr. Ellington cannot control the fact that they breached the lease and moved out in April. He can't drag them back from, I think they moved to Alabama, the owners, and make them get back in that building, right? And the law can't presume or make Mr. Ellington do that and punish Mr. Ellington because of that. Mr. Ellington had the property leased through December 31st of 2024 to 4D Printing, which is an industrial, as I recall, Mr. Harrison can tell us, I know they printed books, like fast print books. They had very large industrial presses in there. So it was not a mom and pop printer. It wasn't like the print shop across the bridge that Dottie Bala has, right? This was a big industrial distribution operation. So am I answering your question?
You are.
But can I ask this question? Let's consider time here, and I'm just trying to be fair to my thoughts about this. If we were 180 days out, and Mr. Ellington doesn't have a lease agreement nor a tentative lease agreement, will your perspective be differently? If we was 180 days out as of January 1st, 2025?
If he had made no efforts to, or demonstrated any intent to relet the property for a use or a prior use, the similar use to the prior use, then that would be the case. But the law is such that it's not simply 180 days. It's only 180 days, in my view, if he does nothing, right? Their lease ended.
I don't understand the law that way, and I know that's your interpretation, but I don't want to mislead anybody who's making a decision on this too. I think you're misleading the law. It stipulates 180 days. And I don't think, Scott, I know I'm bringing you in on his time, but I'm just misunderstanding this because you're saying that's not the law, 180 days?
No, I didn't say that, ma'am. What I'm saying is their ordinance says 180 days.
And it hasn't been.
Or any period of time where there's no intent to reuse it, okay? So the 180 days did not begin in September of 2023. The 180 days, according to the facts as we know them, began in April of 2024.
Well, no, I'm trying to help you out. No, because that's past 180. You just said 180 days is as of December 31st, 2025.
Well, I was about to explain that further.
Okay.
So the 180 days would begin in April, absent any efforts by Mr. Ellington to relet the property. Mr. Ellington immediately hired a contractor to repair the property, right? And it was already a known, or it was already a fact, that the property was leased to 4D Printing through December of 2024, right? So in one sense, the 180 days could start, but it can't, because 4D Printing has the right to go in that building on December 20th and have a Christmas party,
But
because they're leasing it at that point.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to understand, because my question was, would Mr. Ellington be different as of January the 1st, 2025? We count out 180 days, and at that time, he doesn't have a viable lease agreement for somebody to occupy that space. It has to go back to the original, as the law stipulates. The grandfather period is over with.
I'm not sure I understand your question, ma'am.
Help me out, guys, what I'm not explaining, because I'm trying to say, because
There would have to be 180 days with no intent and no efforts by Mr. Ellington.
So that's the semi-clause. It's not only 180 days, it has to be 180 days where he hasn't made any effort to change the place, maintain the place.
Relet it, do anything in furtherance of reletting it, yes.
Have he advertised it for a lease agreement? I mean, this is the lease agreement that he's advertised, and when would it be occupiable if there's a lease agreement?
Yes, so Mr. Mason, you have his affidavit, has been attempting to relet the property for several months now, with the understanding that it couldn't be relet until January 1, because 4D had already paid the rent.
Well, the day
But
is
have you
December
indicated-
February 13th. Go ahead.
Have you indicated when 4D took everything they wanted out of the building?
We believe it was in April of 2024.
Okay. Let's reverse this for a moment and say it was a residential situation where somebody had a house they were renting from somebody. In this case, Mr. Ellington was renting a house. And they move out and say, we're not coming back, but we understand we've got to pay the lease. They paid the lease. Mr. Ellington could go into that house, take everything out of the house, put it on the curb, and start over. That 180 days would be in play at that point, would it not?
Well, Mr. Ellington could not do that if
Well,
if they had paid the rent.
Well, they paid the rent, but they had no intention of reoccupying the building.
If they paid the rent and moved out, he's not allowed to remove their possessions from the property.
That's right.
He's not. I've had to settle cases for landlords who did that illegally and pay settlement monies.
But if
because
4D indicated they had taken everything they wanted out of the building,
they did, but they paid the rent through the end
so they
of the
took
year.
everything they wanted out of the building, but they continued to pay the lease because that was the legal thing to do.
They were required to do that, yes,
By
by
law.
the terms of the lease.
By law, they were required to continue the lease,
By the
even
terms
though
of-
they had totally emptied everything they wanted out of it back in April.
They moved out, yes, they did, but their lease required them not to vacate it. And the lease terms required them to pay the rent, which they did.
Well, we don't see that lease, so we don't know that's for sure. That's just you.
Well, I'll
and I.
tell you in my place, that's what the lease says, Mr. Harrison. I'd be happy to provide you with a copy of it. But I gave them notice that they were in violation of the terms of the lease by vacating the property. So I certainly would be happy to provide you with a copy of the lease if you question what I'm telling you on that.
Mr. Digman, I think it's just, I think it's just a conflict of interest. For instance, by 4D paying the rent, that keeps them, they were not in violation of their lease, but by them vacating it, based off of the zoning, they were in violation of the zoning. So it's like, the violation of the use and violation of the lease are two different things. They stopped the use, but they were still in the lease.
Well, I
seems like it's two
wouldn't
different
call them
things.
in violation of the zoning, Ms. White, that they were legally using the property. It was rezoned during their leasehold time, 30 years. and they continued to use it until they vacated it. They vacated not in violation of the law, but in violation of the terms of the lease. But they paid the rent through the end of 2024.
But that put them in violation of the zoning. It put the property owner in
Well,
in a
it
predicament.
puts the property owner in a predicament,
Yes.
presumably because the city will say the 180 days began to run. Our position is it did not begin to run because he has no control over the tenant vacating the property unilaterally and at first saying, yeah, we moved out. And we said, wait a minute, you have a lease. Oh, yeah, we'll pay the rent. And Mr. Ellington cannot lease the property legally until after the first of the year because they've paid the rent through the end of 2024. So, but we might be confusing, and I apologize, the issues. Legal nonconforming use is not the decision for this commission. The decision for the commission is a recommendation on the proposed rezoning and the criteria you have before you. And I hope I tried to explain that this property has always been what it is. And we're not seeking anything different than what it is and the use that it's always had and the use that almost all the adjoining, or many of the adjoining parcels have, is a use like 4D printing or a tire distribution business or a pallet reseller was one possible tenant. There have been others. There are similar uses across the street, parts distribution, and essentially warehouse distribution uses. That is what we're asking for the zoning to do. The legal nonconforming use is a separate issue, but a conjoined issue, right? So, but again, the applicant, the criteria that applies to a rezoning here is not as clear cut as the city might indicate. Again, we don't see negative impacts by this property as to the nearby residential. Any negative impact by nearby properties would be that which has been rezoned or developed since this property was built 40 years ago.
Okay, I think we've exceeded the time that we wanted to go
Yes,
for the two of these. I think we need to move forward to any public comment, yea or nay. Do we have anybody set up to speak? Thank you, Mr. Digby.
Thank you. We have one to speak in favor of.
Okay. Stephen Holmes, I recognize you. You're here to speak in support.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, you said. Thank you, Chairman. I live here in Old Town on Andrews Drive, and I'm here in support of this application as a nearby homeowner for this proposed rezoning. The abutting property with this Urban Bridge Road frontage, as you know and as has been discussed, contains a gas station on each side of the property, with the one on the south side belonging to the city. And this one also functions as a storage lot for derelict and impounded vehicles. I feel that this zoning should be approved for numerous reasons. The structure is only suitable in its current form for its historical use, light industrial and warehousing. It's hard to imagine a feasible way to utilize this property as it is currently zoned. Simply put, it's a warehouse. Attempts in the past to bring non-industrial use into this area have met with less than pleasing results on occasion. I'd point out the thrift store at 1080 Orange Bridge Road that was somewhat of an eyesore and had some code violations. Zoning that precludes the use of a warehouse as well as a warehouse seems to constitute almost a taking. The subject property must pay insurance and must pay property taxes, while the current zoning classification deprives the owner of the opportunity to generate income. In summary, I'd ask the commission to approve this rezoning because the use seems in keeping with the surrounding area as we see. The building and property are well maintained, clean, and unobtrusive, and I feel that this is the highest and best use of this property at this point in time as a nearby homeowner. Looking at the subject property, it seems almost inconceivable that it could attract a tenant or a buyer under the DCR zoning, due both to the nature of the building and property and the industrial nature of the surrounding area, which is warehouses, gas stations, and storage of derelict cars nearby. The railroad is immediately adjacent, and Irwin Bridge Road is, in fact, according to the signs, a designated truck route by the city with no sidewalks. This is plainly an area that is oriented toward industrial type usage. The subject property is nicely separated from residential properties by steep berms and dense foliage. Finally, this is not a rock quarry type rezoning or a Miller's Chapel Road type rezoning. Those both entail drastically new uses and changes. This merely seeks to continue a use that has taken place for 40 years, and I feel it should be approved. We do need clean, well-maintained properties in the city to remain occupied and viable. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Is that the only one? Yes. Mr. Gaither? All right.
Yes, sir, that was the only one.
Okay. You have anything else to say?
So I would like to clarify a few things. When we talk about use, the use of the property under 4D was specifically a printing and publication. So when that use ceases, under that non-conforming status, only that use can go back. So it's not like if it was a printing press, they moved out, and then 3 months later, a trucking company can move in. It's the use, not all the uses within the zoning. So when we talk about non-conforming use, that's what we talk about. And the city's ordinance is 180 days from the time that the use ceases. We don't talk about leases. Leases are private matters between property owners, and zoning is a land use regulation, and that's what we base that on. We did get in contact, or we did get the owner of 4D did notify us in 2023 that they had retired, they had sold the business, they closed the business, and they're moving. And that's exactly what's identified in the city's business license software and notification that the use ceased. So when the owner notifies us that they're no longer in business, that use is no more, that's when that shot clock, so to speak, starts on that 180 days. To answer your question, Mr. Ford, about notification, and Ms. Goolsby, I think you asked about notification. Yes, every property owner, when the city initiates a rezoning, every property owner affected by that has to receive notification. Signs are published, not on every property, because there's 388 parcels in the downtown district. We didn't put out 388 signs. Signs were posted in corridors that people traveled so they could see that. Notice was given in the newspaper, and public hearings similar to this one and before the city council were held. But before the public hearings, there were public information meetings in which the public was invited to come out and hear what the city's intent was, and the goal and vision of changing the C2 in these areas and in residential areas, changing that to the downtown for that future vision. The purpose of non-conforming ordinance is to ensure that those uses cease in some period of time and that an area changes, a corridor changes. And that was essentially what happened here. As you can see, and as the applicant pointed out, you do have some light industrial uses across the street, and he's correct. When the time comes that those are no longer active and operating uses, they'll have 180 days to be reestablished. If they don't, then they cannot be reestablished. So I hope I answered some of those questions about nonconformity and about how the city notified owners. One thing that is interesting to hear and learn was that there was construction that went on in the building And it sounds like at $100,000 worth of construction, it was quite substantial, but the city never received any notice on that, no permit applications, nothing, no inspections performed. So that's something to note. If you have any questions of me about the zoning and how we look at is it appropriate for the industrial uses to be located here, I'm happy to answer that.
I have a question about spot zoning.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever seen a successful use of spot zoning?
The term successful is hard to define. I have witnessed and seen where spot zoning has deteriorated an area based on the use that can come in and create externalities on adjacent properties. But I've never seen a situation where spot zoning actually comes in and elevates an area and improves an area. But
You referenced at the end of your next to the last paragraph stating that spot zoning is arbitrary, capricious, and makes unjustified exceptions for a property or properties within an established district. That pretty much says it.
yes, sir.
Okay.
Because, Scott, I'm just asking this.
Yes,
Even
ma'am.
if, you know, they keep the zoning as it is and they consider 180 days to be as of December 31st, if this guy signs a lease, you know, whatever, I mean, what you're telling us, it has to go in at the same thing as a print company.
Yes, ma'am. That's the use.
That's the use.
That
It
is
has
the
to be something
specific
similar
use.
in nature as a print company.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so anything outside of that use it doesn't even qualify for the 180 days.
So if, for example, we understand a tire distributor was looking at this location. Had the tire distributor come in and asked to our office, I'm going to move into this building, it was just vacated last week, I need to get a business license. That use would not be allowed to move forward because it's not the same use that was established, the same non-conforming use that was established.
So it's it has to be the same non-conforming use.
Yes, ma'am.
That
That's the
vacates,
use.
that occupies that building going forward.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay.
Any more questions of Mr. Gaither?
Just another thing, when an individual pays their taxes, a commercial entity pays their taxes, is there an indicator on there as the type of zoning that this particular?
I don't know. I don't know about the taxes. I do know.
I'm just trying to see if that's a way of being notified that, you know.
Yeah, the county website, Q Public, is what a lot of people use to identify properties. They'll sometimes, if the tax assessor has the most updated zoning information, they'll publish what the zoning code is.
Okay.
But as far as on the taxes, I know where I live, my taxes don't show what my property is owned.
Okay.
I just have a comment. It is so unfortunate that Mr. Ellington is not able to use his property as he chooses. But the city has made a recommendation, and also the city has done this rezoning in regards to the property. So I think that's my comment.
Any further questions of Mr. Gaither?
No. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
Okay, comments from between us?
Just to piggyback off of what Dr. Hatcher said, it is unfortunate. However, as you know, we all have to do due diligence and know what's going on in our communities. When those signs go up, those notifications go up, it's up to us to know, to read, to do the research, et cetera, et cetera. And so for a business owner, I would expect the same.
In, you know, in regard to amending the comprehensive land use plan, we all know, we've done this every month, where somebody has come in to want to change the comprehensive land use plan. And sometimes we feel like it's necessary or justified, but at at this time, I don't think this one would be justified to change the CLU. Any other thoughts on that?
I would
I
agree
agree.
with that.
I agree with you on
because
that.
I don't think it'll be a one and done. I think the future for that area has already been laid out in the comprehensive land use.
Exactly.
And then we can speak to what may happen if you do spot zoning. But you know, I think you would have let the horse, so to speak, out of the barn if you
Right.
do that. And then there are, to your point, Mr. Chairman, there are residential areas that I think would be negatively impacted if we change the zone.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right.
Any other comments?
And, you know, we are not here to make profitability for the landowners. We're not a zoning organization to manipulate the zoning to make the business occupant, the business owner, the landowner profitable. That's not our purpose. So I just want to keep
Yeah.
that in mind.
And the city has already done this rezoning already in regards to the downtown district.
Yeah, that's my thoughts also.
All right. Hearing those comments, I'll seek a motion on case 30, 2024, ordinance 1409. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chair, regarding case 30, 2024, ordinance 1409, it's a request to amend the comprehensive land use plan from special mixed-use activity center to industrial distribution located at 1007 Irwin Bridge Road. I vote to deny the request.
Okay. Commission, we've got a motion to deny this request. Do I hear a second?
I Phyllis Hatcher, second.
Dr. Hatcher seconds that. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of denial, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're recommending denial at this point.
Mr. Chairman, for point of clarification, the motion I heard from Ms. White was a motion to recommend denial of the comprehensive land use plan amendment. What about the zoning? So
okay.
so that motion's been had and a second and a vote. Mr. Chairman, I would request or ask for a motion for the rezoning request.
Okay. We need, at Mr. Gaither's request, we need a motion for the zoning also. Do I hear a motion?
No, I'll just continue to case number 30, 2024, ordinance 1409, request to amend the official zoning map from downtown district, downtown center sub-area to industrial distribution district. I'd like to make a motion to deny that request.
Okay, we've got a motion to deny that zoning request. Do I hear a second?
I Phyllis Hatcher, second.
Dr. Hatcher seconds. So any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the denial is recommended.
Thank you. On your agenda, the set reports saying City of Conyers none. The city will have a few items for your March Planning Commission, and I hope that you have received those in the mail. We did.
I haven't got anything for
No,
March.
not yet.
Not
Okay,
yet.
well, we will be delivering those because the mail can't get there in time. But,
Alrighty.
But other than that, that's the only
Scott has
business that-
indicated we will be having something delivered to us. Rockdale County has none as far as reports. Our next meeting is March 13th at 6 p.m. in this room. I'm going to make the statement that there are things in the works to make some changes to our system planning commission. Would you like to explain for the record what those are?
Yes, sir. Without going into details, because obviously these will come before you. Next month. There's a list of ordinance amendments that the city is enacting or initiating, I should say. The city council had their retreat in January, and they've made the decision that it's time for the city to grow up and have its own planning commission. So the bosses have spoken with the bosses at the county and notified them that this is the direction that the elected officials of the city have decided to take. So the wheels have been put in motion for the ordinance amendments for the city, and I would think for the county as well to separate and have its own commission. Obviously, next month we'll go into a little more detail about what that means, but essentially the three city members that are on the commission now, which are Mr. Ford, Mr. Harrison, and Ms. White, will be city commission members. The county would then have to appoint members, whether the county decides to have a 5-member or a 7-member board. That's what the BOC's decision can be. The city council has elected and discussed, ordinances haven't been passed obviously, but discussed a 5-member city planning commission.
And I think I would add to this, I may have mentioned this earlier, but part of what predicated all this was the fact that at times we've had to go extended hours, midnight and beyond. And I think that is one of the reasons that the consideration's been brought forward to reduce our load a little bit and keep us in tune. So here we go. One item tonight took us an hour and 10 minutes, or an hour and 15 minutes since I started early. I think that says a lot. So anyway, here the motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting at 7:09.
Do I hear a second?
A second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Scott, you taking up these?